Hi, I'm Carina Rossner, and I am an artist. I am a metalsmith, I'm a lapidary artist, I'm a jeweler, I'm whatever you want to call me. I make something that I call organic silver and organic gold. And it's not that I didn't feed the metals hormones while they were growing up. What I mean is actually something very specific about my process. I start by recycling and recovering sterling or gold in all its different carats. And then I melt it, and I freeform melt it. So whatever shapes happen are based on how the metal reacts in its molten state to that particular environment. So hot days, humid days, dry days, metal all moves differently. I have 5 different ways that I play with molten metal. The first is flaps. I start with a scrap piece of sheet and I reticulate it. The next one is called splats. I take molten metal and then I whack it with a brick, or I splatter it from a crucible. If I have a rock that looks great all the way around or has a special property like chatoyance where as it moves the color changes, then I might set it in what I call wraps. Pieces that used to be earrings or brooches or charms might end up being incorporated into a piece rather than just melted down. Casts are actual pieces of nature that I have taken and replaced in silver using a plaster casting method. So I go all over the place and find these fabulous rocks and I accumulate them, and I accumulate a lot of them. This, for instance, is what a piece of azurite might look like when I buy it from a mineral dealer. So these rocks, as gorgeous as they might be, are a little too heavy to wear as they are. I end up cutting them up into smaller, more bite-sized pieces and integrating them into pieces like these. Now I'm going to show you how I make a couple of these types of pieces. So this is where I get to play with fire. This is the area that none of my kids are allowed to get near. I've got acetylene torches underneath. I've got a fireproof surface, stainless steel backsplash, and nothing flammable anywhere near here. Fire. So one of the really interesting properties of silver is that as it gets hot and molten, it wants to grow toward itself. As I put the torch on these pieces, they sort of contort and melt. And what this is technically called is reticulation. I enjoy melting the silver on different textures just because different things happen. Different conductivity of the base. You could tell that I wasn't really controlling what was going on. It just sort of happened. Splats are some of the funnest things to do. Soapstone's a relatively soft stone, has a smooth surface, and this is what I use to whack them with typically. What we're waiting for is for it to turn into one glob of liquid metal. Okay. Whee! All right. So the next thing I want to do is show you some splatters from the crucible onto the silver block. As soon as we get to a perfectly round ball, we'll know that it's all molten. Move the crucible really quickly and whoo! There you go. So this is one of my favorite friends. I call him Good Vibrations. It's a vibratory tumbler. This thing jiggles, moves. And it's filled with this ceramic media, which is essentially abrasives in different shapes. It's got a pump, and it'll pump water in with a deburring compound. To show you some before and afters, this piece, for instance, with all of these little scraggly burrs all over the sides, would turn into something like this. And here you've got a hole that formed with some sharp edges, but you can see that it got polished out. It's nice to have a big expanse of desks because I like to spread out and have everything to look at so that I can make the best choices. These 2 pieces are interesting for earrings, and so let's see if we can find a texture. I probably would go towards a splatter just because they're so rough. Tough call. Maybe there's a better home for it. Ooh, look at that. I think that was meant for something like that. Yes, look, it fits perfectly. The crinkles in the surface texture of the silver, I think, really do a good job of echoing the charoite. Fabulous crystals, they're called cavesite. And they grow like little puff balls, so they're beautiful all the way around. but they definitely need a splatter. This is actually the really fun part of doing this. And now we're going to attach the bezel to the base plate. So because the bezel wire is actually really thin and the plate is thicker, I tend to heat from the bottom. And as this metal heats up, the solder will actually fuse the two pieces of metal. It'll make it run together. I have this jeweler's trick called liver of sulfur. When I coat something with liver of sulfur, it will turn black. So what it is doing is aging the metal. So we'll let this liver of sulfur dry a second, and then we'll be ready to polish off the highlights. Safety equipment. This wheel is this 3M wheel that has abrasives built into the plastic. So now I've got the highlights of the silver. The deeper crannies are still dark, so you can see the texture of the silver really well. This wheel will give it a satin buff, so it's a slightly different finish. And there are all these different size bits and different shapes for all the different corners. Now we're at the last magic step, putting everything together and making sure it stays that way. This is one we just oxidized and then buffed up the highlights. And now you can see why, because I wanted it to echo all the play of the opal. Now this bezel is what's going to secure the stones. So I am going to push the bezel down so that it curves over the edge of the stone. So that's sort of the last part of organic silver or organic gold, where the two of them are mutually complementary in a way that they sort of flow into each other. Thank you for letting me show you how I make my organic silver jewelry. Now let me show you some of my favorites.